2020 campaign kicks into high gear.
President Trump launches his re-election campaign in Orlando. I'm Mark Irons on the ground here tonight for the rally. We have the latest from Catholic voters.
Tensions heat up with Iran. The U.S. prepares to send 1,000 troops to the Middle East. We'll have a report and reaction from U.S. lawmakers. And putting ideas into action. 250 young adults meet in the Vatican to talk about ways to support the church. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, June 18th, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. President Trump kicks off his 2020 re-election campaign with a massive MAGA rally tonight in Florida. He's trying to build broad support for a second term in office. Polls show that among Catholics, his favorability is lower than that of evangelicals. White House correspondent Mark Irons joins us from the very noisy arena in Orlando. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. 100,000 tickets were requested for this event in the Amway Center, which only holds 20,000 people. So outside, a large spillover crowd, celebrations throughout the day. We got outside ourselves and spoke to Catholics who have mixed feelings about the president as they already looked at 2020 and going to the polls. Trump diehards started filling up open spaces outside this arena more than 24 hours before tonight's Make America Great Again rally. Go Trump! We caught up with Duncan DeMarche outside the festivities. He's more than a rally goer. The Catholic freshman in college spent the 2018 midterms volunteering for the pro-life group Susan B. Anthony list, going door to door for unborn babies.
Informing voters about pro-life candidates in the state of Florida.
How many doors did you knock on?
Several thousand, so it was quite a few. We reached a lot of people. I think God gave us life, and I think we need to protect it.
Duncan says it's the #1 issue he considers as a voter. Catholic Roxana Green agrees, but she says the right to life goes beyond the womb.
The right to life is the right of our veterans in getting proper medical care. The right for homeless that have psychological issues to be able to live their life as well as we can provide.
Green wears her red MAGA cap to this rally and a medal blessed by St. Pope John Paul II on her 25th birthday.
And this has not come off since that day.
Catholic Ron DeLay believes President Trump has been a good fighter for religious liberty.
Whether you're Catholic or anything else, you should have the ability to practice your religion.
And one issue that President Trump has been vocal about since the day he announced his 2016 election is immigration. Just last night he tweeted, "Next week, ICE will begin the process of removing the millions of illegal aliens who have illicitly found their way into the United States."
I don't like any of the things he says that way.
We met Ralph Briscoe, a daily Mass-going Catholic, outside St. James Cathedral in Orlando. He wasn't far from the MAGA rally, but wanted no part of it. He calls the president's behavior egregious.
He's a sexist, he's a racist, he treats other people like nobody should be treated. He certainly doesn't behave like a Christian gentleman.
Our EWTN National Catholic Survey in September showed the majority of Catholic adults, 56%, disapprove of the job Donald Trump is doing as president, while 42% approve. The poll also revealed that health care was the national issue personally most important to Catholics, topping social issues like immigration and traditional values like the right to life. Today we heard from pro- and anti-Trump Catholics and some who remain undecided. Will you vote for him in 2020?
I have to see all the candidates.
This re-election rally here at the Amway Center will truly be a family affair. The president will be joined by First Lady Melania Trump. The vice president will be here with Second Lady Karen Pence. And the president's children are tweeting they will also be in attendance. Lauren?
White House correspondent Mark Irons. Thank you, Mark. President Donald Trump says acting Secretary of Defense Patrick Shanahan will not go through the confirmation process to take the top job. The announcement came shortly after a USA Today bombshell report that the FBI has been probing a 2010 violent domestic dispute between Shanahan and his then wife. The post has not been filled permanently since General James Mattis retired in January. On Twitter, the president writes, "I thank Pat for his outstanding service and will be naming Secretary of the Army Mark Esper to be the new acting Secretary of Defense. I know Mark and have no doubt he will do a fantastic job." The U.S. says it will send an additional 1,000 troops and resources to the Middle East. The outgoing acting Defense Secretary Shanahan and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo say the deployment is in response to hostile behavior by Iranian forces. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee joins us with details from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Secretary Mike Pompeo is back here in Washington tonight after traveling to Tampa, Florida. He met with top military officials at the U.S. Central Command and Special Operations Command. Pompeo and defense officials agree the additional troops are not a buildup to war, but they are aimed at deterring Iranian aggression.
We all have to remember this isn't just 2.5 years or 5 years. This is 40 years of Iranian activity that has led us to this point. And to reestablish deterrence is a challenge, but one that I know the Trump administration is up to.
Secretary Mike Pompeo says the plan to send 1,000 more troops to the Middle East comes after careful coordination by the State and Defense Departments. The Pentagon also released new images of what they say was an Iranian attack on 2 oil tankers last week. One image taken by a U.S. Navy helicopter overhead reportedly shows an Iranian Revolutionary Guard boat moments after they removed an unexploded mine from one tanker. More images of the leftover mine and a hole in the hull from additional blasts. Iran's ambassador to the U.K. denies his country is responsible. He says tensions between Iran and the U.S. are rapidly escalating.
Unfortunately, we are heading towards a confrontation, which is very serious for everybody in the region.
Iran's President Hassan Rouhani says his country is not seeking a confrontation with the U.S., but he vows Iran will withstand mounting U.S. pressure. The State Department condemned the Iranian government this week after it announced it's boosting enrichment of uranium and will soon pass the limit of what it's allowed to stockpile per a 2015 nuclear deal. Iran hopes the threat will break Europe's will to impose tough economic sanctions.
Earlier this evening, Secretary Pompeo met with a top European Union official here at the State Department. The EU is also considering how to respond to the alleged attack on the oil tankers. Also tonight, the Secretary of State is hosting a dinner with members of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, where they're likely to talk about Iran at length. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reporting from the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. Democrats are demanding answers about why the president is sending these troops to the Middle East. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi continues our team coverage.
Look, this is very serious.
Senators from both parties say they're worried about Iran.
Well, everybody should be concerned. Conflict breaking out, something we don't want to do, shouldn't happen.
The risks of a conflict are real. But make no mistake, they're being driven by Tehran's decisions to resort to violence. And that includes what the Secretary of State has described as a blatant assault on international shipping.
Secretary Pompeo accuses Iran of attacking 2 tankers near the Persian Gulf. Republicans tell us they support the president sending more troops to that area.
Should Congress have a vote before any military action?
I think what the president's doing now is well within authorities. If it escalates to a real conflict, then that's a discussion we'd have when that occurs.
To quote President Ronald Reagan, it's peace through strength. I support the president's efforts.
Democrats ask, what exactly are those efforts?
Nobody knows what their plans are and why they're doing what.
We have to make sure there's a strategy. I think that's what's been lacking here. I think we'd be in better shape if we kept the commitments in the Iran nuclear agreement. We stopped their program for a couple of years now. Now they're beginning to build up and potentially enrich uranium, and that's, I think, a result of pulling out.
So I'm very concerned. I wish the president would engage in some direct diplomacy, or the Secretary of State, rather than making threats, and move a process where we can start some negotiation rather than negotiating with warships and mines and missiles.
A State Department diplomat briefed Republican senators during their luncheon today. Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana was there, and he says he learned nothing new. Now, Democrats turned down a similar invitation. Senator Chuck Schumer says he wants to hear directly from the president. He says the president should scrap tonight's campaign speech and instead speak about Iran. Lauren?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. The former jailed president of Egypt has been buried after collapsing and dying yesterday inside a courtroom. Protesters in New York City expressed their anger over how Mohamed Morsi has been treated. The demonstrators gathered in Times Square soon after state media announced that the first democratically elected president had died. Morsi had been jailed since his 2013 ouster. The 67-year-old was facing charges in a spying case. In previous courtroom appearances, due to angry outbursts, judges ordered him kept in a glass cage where they could turn off his audio. Morsi was buried outside of Cairo. The Holy See press office says reports Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI suffered a minor stroke are false. The rumor about Pope Benedict, who is 92, started spreading last night on social media. Benedict's personal secretary describes the story as fake news. Nearly 250 young adults from around the world are in Rome to discuss ways to implement ideas from last year's Synod on Youth. Earlier this year, Pope Francis wrote a 50-page letter to young people telling them to not let the world rob you of hope and joy or drug you into becoming a slave to their interests. Joining me now is Courtney Grogan, Rome correspondent for Catholic News Agency. Courtney, welcome back. Have the young people said if the Holy Father's words on the Synod on the Youth have had an impact on them?
At today's Vatican press conference, we heard from a youth delegate from New Zealand who shared that Pope Francis's message to young people, Christos Vivit, has personally encouraged her in her own faith journey, as well as her work in youth ministry. She said the challenge now is to determine how best to get this message to the youth and young adults around the world who need to hear it.
Well, tell us about these delegates. Where are they from? What's their background? How old are they?
Delegates were selected by the different national bishops' conferences around the world, representing more than 100 different countries. They range in age from 18 to 29 years old.
What's the plan for implementing the ideas from the Synod? How would it happen around the world, and what are some of those ideas?
Much of the discussion this week will center on how to concretely apply Pope Francis's apostolic exhortation, Christos Vivit, published in April. In this letter, Pope Francis addressed issues facing and obstacles facing young people around the world, including feelings of isolation, overconsumption of media, and addiction to pornography. Pope Francis challenged young people to be leaders in their faith with both boldness and joy. And it will be up to the youth delegates this week, in coordination with their home dioceses, to determine how best to apply this in their home countries.
You know, I understand there's also a Mass at St. Peter's Basilica. Are they going to meet Pope Francis?
Yes, on the final day of the forum, attendees will attend a Mass in St. Peter's Basilica celebrated by Cardinal Kevin Farrell, the prefect of the Vatican Dicastery of Laity, Family, and Life. After the Mass, there will be an opportunity for each of the delegates to meet with Pope Francis.
Wow, that's going to be quite an honor for them. Thank you so much, Courtney Grogan, Catholic News Agency, Rome correspondent.
Thank you, Lauren.
Coming up, violence in Egypt. A lawmaker joins me to talk about the persecution of Coptic Christians. And a milestone on Capitol Hill for one senator. And with her aye vote, Republican Senator from Maine, Susan Collins, cast her 7,000th consecutive vote. She becomes only the third senator ever to reach this milestone. Senator Collins has never missed a roll call vote. Lawmakers, academics, and policy experts will gather in Washington this week to help Egypt's Coptic Christians achieve equal citizenship rights, including protection from violence and full religious freedom. Egypt has been home to increasing violence against Coptics. It's hard to forget these images of Palm Sunday 2017, when twin suicide bombings targeted a Coptic church and a Greek Orthodox church. In 2018, Islamic militants ambushed 3 buses carrying Christian pilgrims on their way to a remote desert monastery south of Cairo. That killed 7 people and wounded 19. Joining me now is Representative French Hill, Republican from Arkansas. He will be one of the guest speakers at this week's Coptic Solidarity's 10th Annual Conference. Congressman, welcome to our broadcast.
Lauren, thanks for having me.
You visited Egypt. It's estimated that Coptic Christians make up less than 10% of the population. What did you hear from them living there? What are conditions like? And most importantly, what do they need?
Well, I think we're concerned about Christian communities all across the Middle East and the Levant, but Egypt's one of our richest, most traditional Christian communities in the whole region. There are about 10 million Christians, and most of those are Coptic Christians, a church founded by St. Mark in his evangelism to Alexandria. So it's a big country with a large Christian population. They simply want to be treated fairly in the rule of law, like all other Egyptians that take their water from the Nile.
Does U.S. aid to Egypt need to be more closely tied to the government's protection of Coptic Christians?
Well, President el-Sisi is a terrific economic policy partner and national security partner for the United States. He's backed Israel for almost 40 years now in the peace process. But we want to make sure that Egypt continues to share his vision across the whole country, one of acceptance, one of tolerance, one that follows the rule of law. So President el-Sisi is a good partner to the U.S. He's had the right vision for religious tolerance in Egypt, but we need the laws at the local level to reflect his vision.
Well, you've introduced legislation here that expresses concern over attacks against Egypt's Coptic Christians. What kind of response are you getting from your colleagues?
We have a strong bipartisan group, over 50 members, that support HRES 49, which is my resolution to give that protection to the Coptic Christians. We've met with Egyptians many times on it. I've met with President el-Sisi twice over the years. This is an important issue that reflects that full sense of partnership that we have with Egypt, but also institutionalizes that protection for all Egyptians of religious freedom and religious tolerance. And President el-Sisi's been at the forefront of that. Recently, I was so pleased the Pope visited Egypt or visited Abu Dhabi and was with the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar Mosque there in Cairo, the most important mosque in Islam, both preaching religious tolerance for all citizens of all countries, including Egypt.
Yeah, we covered that extensively. I have that document here that is called Human Fraternity for World Peace and Living Together. And in it, the Pope says, in the name of this fraternity torn apart by policies of extremism and division, that it is important for people to have good actions. And I think that that's exactly what the Catholic Church is looking for in bringing both Muslims and Christians together.
Exactly. You look at el-Sisi on the civil side of society calling for that tolerance. You have the Grand Imam calling for tolerance among Muslims in Egypt. That's the right mix that we want. Now we want to see the results, both from a religious point of view and from a civil society point of view, that all Egyptians are treated with tolerance and equality across that big, beautiful, important country.
Congressman French Hill, Republican from Arkansas, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Lauren.
Up next, the new law in Quebec may stifle religious freedom. We'll have a discussion. Pro-life activists and abortion supporters packed a hearing room last night in Massachusetts. Lawmakers there are debating a bill that would allow women to obtain an abortion after 24 weeks if the baby has, quote, fatal anomalies. Currently, the state only allows abortion after 24 weeks to preserve the life or health of the mother. Harvard University has rescinded the admission of a survivor of the deadly shooting at Parkland High School. Kyle Kashuv admitted he made abhorrent racial slurs on social media about 2 years ago. He calls it an effort to be as extreme and shocking as possible. Kashuv apologized and asked Harvard to reconsider. The school said no. The government of Quebec passed a law this weekend prohibiting some public servants from wearing religious symbols on the job. Supporters say it enshrines the separation of church and state. Catholic bishops say it will nourish fear and intolerance, and the National Council of Canadian Muslims is taking legal action. Now, this new law, formerly known as Bill 21, bans the wearing of religious symbols, all of them, including crosses, yarmulkes, hijabs, Sikh turbans, and it also requires citizens to uncover their faces to receive a public service for identification or security purposes. Joining me now by Skype from London, Ontario is Derek Ross, Executive Director and General Counsel of the Christian Legal Fellowship. Derek, welcome to our broadcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Lauren.
Let me get this straight. All religious symbols are included: crosses, hijabs, turbans, kippas or yarmulkes. Doesn't the Constitution guarantee religious freedom?
It certainly does. And in fact, that's one of the first fundamental freedoms that's protected in our Charter of Rights, which is Canada's constitutional Bill of Rights. But what the Quebec government has done with this law that you just mentioned, which bans the wearing of religious symbols by certain government workers, is they've invoked a rarely used provision of our Constitution called the Notwithstanding Clause, Section 33 of our Bill of Rights, that basically allows a government in certain circumstances to limit a fundamental freedom, including freedom of religion, for a certain period of time. And that's one of the many reasons why this bill has been so controversial.
Well, the prohibition wearing religious symbols only applies to new employees. So those who were employed can wear them as long as they keep their current job. If they're promoted, not so much. So what happens if they refuse?
That's one of the questions that's outstanding as a result of the legislation. It's not entirely clear what the penalties are going to be, but we do know that the law has a provision in place that says that government will be able to take what they call corrective measures. And for all intents and purposes, the expectation is that an employee, a government employee that does not comply with this new edict would in all likelihood be losing their jobs.
Do you think this will be overturned?
Well, that is the ultimate question that a lot of folks are asking. We're concerned about the culture this law is creating, an anti-religious culture. When you think about it, what the law is saying is that your religion interferes with your ability to do your job well, to do it impartially and properly. So whether you wear a religious symbol or not, if you're a person of faith, think about what this culture is going to contribute to. You will be intimidated and pressured to suppress your faith and keep it to yourself, and that cannot be a good thing. And we do hope that others will see that the problems associated with this and that this law will be overturned.
Derek Ross, Executive Director and General Counsel of the Christian Legal Fellowship, thank you so much for your insight.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm betting that we haven't heard the last about that law. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night, and God bless you.